Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, it is a great honor joining you and hosting yet another series out of our Consumer Voices annual report. And this time we are serialized it to say the plight of consumers on goods and service delivery. Uganda's case on regards to electricity sector, and we are sharing the voices of the consumers on issues that came up. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I'm greatly honored. We are going to look at electricity. You will recall that we looked at financial services, we looked at transport, and then the communication services. So today we are going to look at energy, electricity, and we are greatly honored to have you online. First, our great honors, and I would like to thank Humanist Media Africa for the certificate of appreciation. We are also greatly honored partnering with you and enriching the food and consumer safety program. It has been a great pleasure. The 40+ series or TV series we have held have been great and have been a great input. So colleagues, today we are digging deep into electricity, and we will appreciate that electricity plays a role in everything, as even now, without electricity, we are challenged. And some of the TV programs earlier, where our producer is in Entebbe, there were challenges with electricity and we missed some series, but we did them thereafter when electricity stabilized. And you will find that electricity challenges not only consumers, but they also challenge businesses, they challenge government agencies, and then that impedes service delivery. And with all aspects going on, if electricity is inaccessible by consumers and it is not safe, it impacts the environment. It impacts operation, cost of doing business, cost of living, quality of life. So what we are going to share with you is something very key. And I would like to start by saying, if it is not safe, as a consumer, stop, assess, fact check, and engage, or you expose. So with our, if not safe, all along, we harvested consumer complaints to get the views of what is challenging consumers, to see to it, how do we contribute to improving the services and goods on the market? And electricity was one of the most complained about, and we are honored today to speak to it. And we would like to unpack. So as I give a curtain riser, I would like once again to thank our host, the Humanist Media Africa, the Humanist TV Africa, our producer, Dennis, Paul Kato, Mukasa, and all the other colleagues with respective cities in Eastern, Southern, Western, and the global world, Africa and the global world. We thank you very much for hosting us, and we will keep on working with you to empower consumers to impact positively for sustainable development, saying to it how best we can add value to achieving the sustainable goals. So with that said, I would like to welcome Bernard to come and also start unpacking, and then best to elaborate on other issues. Bernard, you're most welcome, the coordinator of Food Safety Coalition and also the program officer concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I hope that you're able to hear me, and so the viewers will be able to hear me. Just to confirm that, please let me know.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay, cool, thanks. So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to deliberate more on electricity sector. Of course, we are still looking at our series, looking at breaking down the consumer issues in the different sectors that we have. I am happy that we're able to handle the financial sector, we're able to handle the communication sector, and now today we want to look at the electricity sector. What were the issues in the electricity sector? But also, as we discuss, I'll be able to bring on board aspects of electricity and business, electricity and food systems, and then, of course, electricity and consumer protection. So those are some of the areas that I'll be running through during the course of the next few minutes that I'll be presenting to us. Now, to begin with, quite a number of issues were raised by the different consumers. Of course, these are consumers that are using electricity. And as you are aware, there is a lot of usage of electricity when it comes to everybody around. And now you realize that electricity was also one of those that were highly complained about. We are talking about over 2,620 people were complaining about electricity services. And these are the people who had the opportunity to actually register their complaints. Of course, aware that we have others who were not able to present or who are not able to complain. They didn't have the opportunity to meet our teams to collect their complaints. So you realize that over 2,620 people were really talking about electricity. And that means that there is a problem when it comes to electricity. Now, I will dive a little bit into understanding the electricity. You realize that Uganda as a country, we have a lot of electricity that we're actually producing. So many dams, Karuma Dam, we have dams in Jinja, we even have local dams actually. In my district alone, they're already constructing a dam there. So quite a number of dams which are owned by government, but also others are private dams. Now, we are generating electricity both for domestic use, but also for export. We are able to sell out electricity to our neighboring countries. I think Rwanda and other countries are getting some bit of electricity from Uganda. Now, surprisingly, during the course of harvesting complaints from consumers, the issue of the rates, the tariffs for electricity came out. Consumers think that the cost of electricity is actually high. So they were thinking that, well, if we are producing electricity, because Uganda is not actually importing electricity, if we are producing our own electricity, why then should electricity be higher in terms of cost? Why should you pay the amount of money you're paying per unit at that rate, and yet we are actually producing our own electricity? So there were concerns that are related to the issue of the cost of electricity. And then people are thinking that there is need for the regulatory authority to be able to reflect on the amount of electricity we are producing versus the cost that we are producing it. Because in essence, the consumers think that when you're producing your own electricity, then the tariffs should not be as high. You realize that we need to guide the consumers on how the tariffs are actually generated. Because when we're interacting, when we're sharing this information with the electricity regulator or regulatory authority, the regulator seems to be having, of course, a guide on how they come up with the tariffs. But I think this is open information that everybody is supposed to know so that the consumers are not feeling some bit of being cheated by the sector. This information should be public that, hey, you see, when the taxes increase on the distributor of electricity or the producer generator of electricity, then we increase the tariff according to that. Now, the consumer feels that if I am the one producing in my country, then I shouldn't pay electricity at a cost that we are actually being charged per unit. So consumers were complaining literally to think that the tariff is higher. And so maybe they need an explanation on how do we compute tariffs so that we avoid this bit of regulator and consumer dilemma. The regulator says no, the tax base is high, so we need to meet the cost of production, of generation, and distribution. But then you realize that whereas the consumer is paying tariffs, there's always a cost, of course, to cater for the service fees. Now, which the entity collects at a particular period of the month. Now, the consumers realize that during the course of payment of these tariffs, it now depends on which period of time you're paying. If someone is paying for electricity at the start of the month, consumers noted that actually they pay less than they would pay maybe in the middle of the month. So when we interacted with the service providers and the regulators, you learn that actually the service fees are being deducted at a particular period of the month, preferably at the end of the month. So the consumer feels that there is a lack of consistency when it comes to the tariff. Little do they know that actually the tariff at the end of the month includes the service fees, while the payment at the start of the month is probably not inclusive of the tax, or rather of the such charges. So this kind of information has to be communicated to the consumers. For instance, at what point do you pay the tariff? At what point do you pay the service fees? And how do we pay all those fees? So the consumers were thinking that they pay a lot of money at a particular period of time for the same units of electricity, and they get less units after paying more money. So this kind of information seems to be lacking in the community out there, and so leaves consumers at a dilemma of understanding. And that's why you see that the consumers would start thinking that maybe it's an issue of the regulator cheating the consumer, and yet actually it is not the issue. So those are some of the aspects that came out through when it comes to the payments. The other issue that was coming out, of course, the issue was that majority, almost half of the complainants were really talking about this issue of payment. But the other issue was the delays. When I have a challenge, with my electricity and I contact the regulator or I contact the service provider, let us say the service provider that is responsible for the distribution of electricity, I take long to receive the response from them. So for instance, if I've loaded my token, I expect that it's instant that I should be receiving a message with the token number which I have to load on my electricity. But there have been instances where the consumer pays their money, the money is deducted off their funds, and then they take more than an hour or two, or even 24 hours before they receive a token. So someone has loaded electricity and maybe he has children who are going to go for prep at home, they're going to do a reading or they're going to read. So they have paid for electricity and the token is not sent to them. And so they are not able to actually pay. And so they remain in darkness amidst making a payment. So there are those delays that keep coming on board, reported by the consumers, that they're being delayed sometimes whenever they make a payment and the monies are not actually reflected on their phones, the token is not sent, and so they're not actually able to load electricity. So that was another issue altogether. So we also got this issue and presented it to the regulator to try to dig out why would someone pay their token and then you're not able to send them the token. Now, one of the issues that came out clearly from the regulator says, no, sometimes you load your money, but there is a problem in network. Now, if there is a problem with network, they're also not able to send you a message or they're not able to process your money timely. So what does that mean? That there is a connection between communication and electricity. So meaning that if the communication sector is not providing network adequately, it will mean that the electricity sector will not be able to receive people's monies timely, but also to send back feedback to somebody timely. So that is how the electricity sector cannot work in isolation of communication. Remember that every consumer is actually paying their money via mobile money. So if the network of mobile money is not on, it means that the consumer is not able to pay the money to the distributor, and so the distributor is also not able to send a token to the consumer. So electricity sector must work closely with the Communications Commission, because these two, they like it or not, at one point they will support each other. Similarly to the financial sector, if you look at the services, if you want to pay electricity, there are three sectors that are playing part. The financial sector, to ensure that the people have the money on the mobile. The communication sector, to ensure that there is network. And the electricity sector, to make sure that they have received the money and they're able to send a token to people. So you realize that these three sectors, whatsoever, they will have a connection in one way or the other for you to have electricity in your house. So a failure in any of the three is going to cause a delay in the electricity sector. So we have a challenge there. So there is need, therefore, that the communication sector, the communication sector, the financial sector, and the electricity sector are actually working in unison for a consumer to be able to receive electricity. So the last time I spoke, I said there is no way sectors can start working in isolation. And this is the proper case. Now, leveraging on the same case, you will actually realize that the communication sector can only survive when there is electricity. So that's how interesting it is. For instance, every time there is no electricity in offices, you will discover that actually network disappears, especially the internet. So you will learn that actually in the absence of the electricity sector, whenever there is no electricity, there is always a risk that the internet will actually go off, especially those people who are using local network LAN, local area network. So you'll find that if you're in an office space and electricity goes off, it is by default that you're going to lose the internet. So some of those issues kept coming in handy. Now, there are also other issues to do with the outages. You have people connected to the main grid, and when people are connected to the main grid, you realize that now there is power shortages or power outages or blackouts. And actually, this was even the most complained about thing. It was complained about by around about 72% of the people, of the consumers. And what are they raising? They are raising issues to do with, I am running a business and electricity goes off. Now, just imagine someone who's doing a business, someone has a milk, okay, dairy somewhere. And so they have 10,000 liters of milk. They can only preserve this milk by refrigeration. And now there's no electricity in that place for 3 days. Now, because of that kind of outage, where someone has to rely intensely on electricity to preserve milk or meat or fish or any other perishable, and then the electricity is not there for 3 days, what that means, these traders will resort to other better means, or what they call better, to preserve their 10,000 liters of milk on which they have invested a lot of money. So what are we seeing? We see that in places where there are outages, people opt to go for formalin, which is a very dangerous chemical, and now they have no option than to use it in preservation of milk or preservation of meat. We have also seen that because there is no electricity and people don't have these other means of preserving their food, people tend to use chemicals wrongly to actually preserve the food, because in their areas, electricity has been off for a week, for 3 days, for 2 days, etc. Just imagine someone who's running a saloon. All our saloons, for instance, in Kampala, are highly dependent on electricity. Meaning that if someone has paid their token of electricity, they will actually assume that they can be able to run their saloon 24/7. But unfortunately, in some of the communities, the power outages have actually led to business collapse. That many of the businesses have started collapsing because there is unreliable electricity. Imagine you start shaving someone's head and electricity goes off. It means that you must be having another alternative. For instance, you must be having either solar or a generator. Unfortunately, most of our business people are not able to afford some of these alternatives. In Kampala, there are very few people who can afford to run a generator for a whole day in a saloon. So because it is a little bit complex and expensive, they will not run, and so they will just remain home until electricity comes back. Of course, also remember that burning fuels, generators, and all this, it's also not a sustainable way of utilization of energy. So you'll find that also it is another climate issue, climate change issue that we need to deal with. So the power outages are a very big challenge to business. It's a very big challenge to communication. It's a very big challenge to even transport now that we even have vehicles that are running on electricity. So assuming that electricity has not been there, but you have an electric car, what do you do? And you have to travel. So the issue of electricity was really, really complained about by our people. Let us also look at it maybe in another way. One of the complaints, this one we got it actually from the service providers. Someone says, we are running masts, these telecom masts, but they are dependent on electricity. But then we don't have electricity in the place for 2 days, meaning that the operators of the mast have to invest more money, one, in either solar or in generators, and they're generating what? Electricity to run the equipment so that people can have internet or network. So all of these are issues that have come our way. Now, there are people also who say, okay, now we don't have electricity for 1 week, but we have phones. We need to call our relatives. We need to call our friends. We need to withdraw money from our phones. We need to withdraw money from the bank. But you can only do that when you have electricity, you have a phone that has been charged. So just imagine you have a computer, you have a phone that you have to charge in order to communicate, but the electricity is not there. So all of these are challenges that came out whenever consumers were actually submitting on the outages of electricity. Now, there are people who also complained, giving us some bit of perspective, that many times they purchase electricity using their mobile phones or, of course, mobile money. But then it takes long not only to get a token, but even to get a message or a notification from Umeme, which is in itself a challenge altogether. And all this can compromise the quality of electricity, the customer care services that we offer to the consumers of electricity. So quite a number of things. Now let us look at maybe from another perspective, looking at safety of food and safety of and electricity, looking at food systems and electricity. So there are quite a number of things again that come in here. Whereas when we're talking about food systems and food safety, I told you about the current misuse of chemicals as people are trying to preserve food. Now, it was vivid when we interacted with consumers and actually the service providers. They say, okay, whenever we are selling our meat, our milk, our fish, we need cold chain, which is true. They need cold chain for them to be able to sustain the sustainability of these foods. Unfortunately, the facilities, cold chain facilities, are run on electricity. Now, in the absence of electricity, it would mean that we're not able to have safe food using the correct means because people don't have electricity to use. So they will resort to using formalin, to using other chemicals to preserve the food for long. So all of these are issues that affect the food system, the preservation of food, and also ensuring that we are able to manage the system. The other issue is that people who are processing food, if you come to Kampala or wherever, everybody is using electricity to process food. So maize mills and others, people are using electricity. So just imagine if there's an outage of electricity. Now what happens? It will mean that people are not able to run business, people are not able to actually process their food, and so that can be a risk factor to people sleeping hungry. Just imagine in your village and power has gone off for 3 days, but you have only one electronic processing unit. How then are people going to process the food? So we had all those concerns that were coming from the communities. How electricity is very key in communication. How transport, rather, electricity is very key in food systems. How electricity is very key in business entities, but also how electricity is very key in transport. So there is no single way you can actually deal with electricity in a manner that is actually not meeting consumer needs, because it is actually one of the central issues that we need to have. Now, away from that, there are people who are cooking using electricity, and now there is no electricity. They have bought electricity, but they don't have a token to load in. They have no electricity for 3 days, but they have only to depend on electricity to cook food. Do you see how actually electricity then can result into particular issues around nutrition? Now you're not getting malnourished, not because you're not eating, but you don't have the energy to use to cook the food. You don't have electricity to cook for 3 days, for 4 days. So you'll find that the moment electricity is not there, people will opt to go for other means which might be environmentally insensitive. For instance, when electricity is expensive, people are not able to think that they can use electricity for cookery. And what does that end to? People will go to the forests and cut the trees so that they can use charcoal or firewood to actually cook. Just imagine if the cost of electricity was bearable. Schools would be using electricity to actually cook their food. But just imagine, because of the high cost of electricity, because of the unreliability of electricity, schools cannot even think of cooking using electricity. But do you know how much firewood schools are using to actually cook food? These are 2,000 students in a school. These are 2,000 students in a university, and they have to eat 3 meals per day: breakfast, lunch, and supper. And they're using energy to cook this food. Now, the question would be, how much energy are we losing in schools, in prisons, all those entities, all those institutions that are cooking food? What are they using? They are actually using charcoal or firewood because the cost of electricity is high. 2, because the electricity is unreliable. So these things are actually contributing to climate issues. People have to cut lots of trees to cook food. If we had electricity, reliable and cheaper, perhaps people would be using electricity in the cooking of the food. So you see that you cannot distance food systems from electricity sector. You cannot distance business from the electricity. Just imagine if you have a hotel and then you don't have a generator, you don't have solar, and you are only relying on grid, the electric grid of the nation. And then you have all these meetings in your hotel, and electricity goes off. Every meeting is using AC. Every meeting is using a projector. Every meeting requires some bit of lighting. I mean, what would we do? So we have a lot of things that we need to deal with when it comes to ensuring that there is consistency in the electricity supply, in ensuring that the cost of electricity is relatively lower to meet the demands of the communities. Otherwise, if we don't have electricity reliable and cost effective, then we're going to lose many people in business. Just imagine people who are doing welding. They can only use electricity. Now, if electricity is not on for the last 2, 3, 4 days, how does the person dealing with welding, how are they going to run their business? The saloon people have talked about them, but also we have people in hotels. We have people in processing. We have people who are now driving vehicles which are electric. We have people who are dealing with what is this called? People who are running fuel stations. Every person in those categories is actually using electricity. What about people who are doing printering? around the universities, you will realize that actually without electricity, the universities will collapse because people are using electricity to print notes. People are using electricity to present to students, or those are lecturers. I mean, a lot of stuff. Now, away from that, let us look at electricity and health. Many hospitals, if not all, we are using electricity in surgical procedures. We cannot operate a human being. We cannot carry out an operation or a surgical procedure if we do not have electricity. That is why in some of the hospitals, whenever there is no electricity, we don't carry out surgical procedures. Because how would you carry out a surgical procedure if you don't have electricity? Now, in situations where there are inconsistencies, and then this hospital is not having the capacity to have a generator or a standby generator or maybe a standby solar, many patients die if the electricity is not there. Because imagine you've started an operation and power goes off, you're not able to see which vein you had cut or you had closed. What then happens? So we need to make sure that all our people have access to electricity every now and then. Because now when the dams increase, we think that actually there will be increase in the amount of electricity that we are producing. So it is very important that we are actually able to have electricity with us all the time, and so our people will have to survive in one way or the other. So many times we need to dive into how do we make sure that the regulators of electricity, the distributors of electricity, the suppliers, the generators of electricity have potential to actually support us in having electricity, have to deliver electricity to our people. So many times we go wrong by thinking that the person producing electricity is not responsible for other things. It should be a chain. The one generating, the one distributing, the one regulating, all of them have to come in handy. Now, as we also speak through electricity, as I little bit wind up, you already learned that at this particular time, we have seen electricity and business, we've seen electricity and communication, we have seen electricity and health. Now, just imagine if you're at customs and you have to travel, you have to process your documents. You have to make sure that your documents are actually at the airport anyway. Let us use the airport as an example. Now, just imagine if an airport has no electricity, what is going to happen? How are you going to process people's travel documents? I mean, so electricity is something that we need to deal with in and out. We cannot afford to have electricity that is very expensive. We cannot afford to start thinking about electricity that is not evenly distributed, because also that was another challenge, that there are communities in Uganda up to now, they have no access to electricity. Now you would wonder, we are talking about globalization. We are talking about leaving no one behind. So how do we talk about electricity across the country and yet we have communities that don't have electricity? Do you think that those communities are not supposed to be competitive to process food, to have saloons, to have welding points? Are they not part of the country? Are they not part of the region? So we must make sure that electricity is generated and distributed across the country, leaving no one behind in the energy sector. And if we do that, and people can have electricity everywhere, and we have electricity at every point, people can run business, people will have all this information with them, people will have access to information, people will have, I mean, these basics that we need to give to people around electricity. Now, as I conclude, maybe before you play the video, there is an issue of villages that were complaining that for them, they see electricity in the towns and they think they're not part of the country. Because the communities in rural, they say, but you guys, is electricity, are we part of the electricity grid? At least the government of Uganda has tried to extend electricity to the different corners of the country. But we notice that there are some villages, actually rural settings, where people up to now, they have no access to electricity. And that can be something of inequality. People are talking about that inequality in the distribution of electricity. What about electricity in schools? Assuming that there is no consistency in distribution of electricity, what happens to our schools? They have to go for preps in the morning and preps in the evening. How are these students helped? How are they learning? What about our students who are using electricity for computer studies during their time? They have a lecture or they have a lesson rather using computers and they don't have electricity. How do you explain that? So our argument here is calling upon the distributors, the regulators, government to ensure that everybody, anywhere, anytime, they have access to clean energy and more so electricity in their communities. And then we have challenges that people are reporting when it comes to the time of installation of electricity. Yeah, so people do not know, for example, you've extended electricity in our community. Yes, thank you, you brought it. Now the question is, how do we sensitize the masses on the utilization of electricity lines? So where there is a line, there are particular things that are not supposed to be there, maybe trees in the same line with electricity and all this. But we have seen people die because they are constructing maybe a tent or something around the electric line. Whereas the consumer will be the problem by constructing near the pole, the question would be, was he informed of the dangers that come along with putting an electric line where they stay? I saw one of the colleagues, one of the community members died. Actually, I think there were about 6 people who died at a go. They were erecting a tent for a wedding, the wedding that was happening the next day. And as they were erecting the tent, there was a metallic something that fell on that hit the electric line, and 6 people died. Now the question would be, are our people aware of the precautions, safety precautions when they stay around the electric line? Are our people aware how much distance you should take between the electric pole and wherever you want to do any kind of transaction or business or wedding, whatever? This kind of information has to be prioritized. It has to be sent out there on a daily basis by the responsible entities, because the consumers are extremely unaware. People are not aware. Why don't we have community dialogues? Why don't we have community engagements? Why don't we have radio talk shows? Why don't we have television shows? Why don't we have engagement of cultural, religious leaders and other leaders to sensitize the masses on how to manage the electricity? How do we sensitize the masses on how to deal with, how to manage the electric poles? How do we sensitize people that, hey, if you are staying near the pole, this is the kind of care that you need to do? We have moved to areas and you see an electric pole, but you see fire. People are burning in those areas, and people die just like that. So we have seen people die because they have been hit by electricity. Maybe they caught fire or something. You can imagine in this news where 21 people were electrocuted in Masaka, just because probably they were not aware. And this is a whole publication that people can always read. But why do we go into rescuing people who have died, who have been electrified? Why can't we rescue people before? Why don't we put in mechanisms to prevent occurrences of this kind of death? I think it would be very important that we invest money in ensuring that we create awareness, we sensitize the masses, we protect consumers. Recently, a few days ago, there was a gentleman who, I think in the eastern part of this country, who was seen climbing the electric poles and walking. I don't know that it's called walking on the pole. Why? Because he was mentally disturbed and I think wanted to commit suicide, and he decided to use the electricity as a means. In this case, we want to appreciate government and our leaders, women and others who rescued. But you see, some of these things may happen because our consumers do not know the danger that comes along with misuse of electricity. So we want to urge the distributors, the generators of electricity, that given the complaints that we got, we just noted that people are just not aware of how to manage, how to deal with electricity lines, how to take care of the electricity lines, how to deal with electronics in a home. We've seen fires in schools, we've seen fires in hotels, we've seen fires, and the origin is electricity. So how are we using this sector to create awareness? Now, how do we wire? The issue of wiring. How do we wire people's homes? How are we connecting electricity in people's homes? Who is actually connecting the electricity? Are these people regulators? Are they certified? Are they having the requirements for them to be able to actually have electricity in their homes safely? So it brings us back to the consumer right on safety. How is the electricity sector assuring the safety of the community members who are actually their big customers? How is government protecting the electricity consumers? Because they are paying a lot of tax on electricity, because they are giving government a lot of money on electricity. So how are we giving them the electricity on time, enough electricity, giving them resources, services around? How are we assuring that actually they are protected amidst the challenges? So whenever we are generating a lot of electricity, how come the electricity is not reaching out to everybody at the time? So we want to implore really our masses to make sure that we seek support in all communities, go sensitize, use all media available, use the radios, use the papers, use the TVs, use local religious leaders and cultural leaders. Let us look at the local governments. Let us empower the local government to be able to sensitize their masses. Why should the district chairperson go to a funeral and they don't have a message to push out? They are fidgeting to talk about PDM, and yet they can talk about electricity, about food, about water, about communication, about all the things. How do we deter people from doing corrupt actions when it comes to electricity? So the electricity sector is a big sector that we need to keep talking to. We make sure that we are able to manage issues of electricity. Now, the other issue is, how often do consumers complain and get feedback when it comes to redress? The issue of redress. People complain, they are not helped. People are complaining, they are not redressed. So how often should Ministry of Energy, the regulator, the distributor, or even the generator of electricity support people to be redressed whenever they are challenged with electricity, whenever they complain? There is also something that has come on board that sometimes when people are complaining, they take longer to be responded to in terms of customer care. So you call a customer line and you take a lot of time to be responded to. Every time one calls, they tell you our person is busy, our team is busy. I mean, and then if they are busy, why don't you have a mechanism of returning those calls so that you listen to your consumers, you listen to your customers, and they give you information? Now, on the side of consumers will also want to implore you to search for information. Sometimes you buy gadgets that use electricity and they have put there, they have already written there some instructions, but we are not interested in reading them. So it's also very good that as consumers, we read instructions. If you look at most of the polls, the energy sector has tried its very best to actually put there warning signs. For instance, you find that on the polls, they have put there something like danger. You have to be critically aware to know that this danger is not there for fun. It's actually dangerous for you to climb that tree. But then you see that people are even harvesting, they call it harvesting. They go and harvest transformer oil from the transformers. Now, these are the concerns also that are coming from the regulator, from the distributors of electricity that we have engaged. They say, hey, look here, whereas we are doing our best, but the consumers are actually our failing agents. We have a pole, we've written their danger, but you see someone climbing on the pole to go and steal electricity. Our transformers have been set so that they distribute electricity to everybody. But then a few of us go and climb those transformers and steal the transformer oils, and you end up having transformer oil on the market, which is now being used in the cookery of food, which is strange. I mean, we need to do a lot of critical awareness. We need to take responsibility. We need to take social concern as consumers, so that whereas the consumer organizations are pushing the regulators, the distributors, the generators of electricity, you are also being supportive. Let us support the process as consumers. Let us not be complacent. We need to comply with the regulation around us. Whereas we are fronting your issues to the regulator, to the distributor, or whoever we are giving your issues, but also pay attention to your responsibility as consumers. Let us take action. Now, there are people who are vandalizing the infrastructure of electricity, that whereas the generator, the distributor, they are trying to push out electricity, There are community members who are busy vandalizing the infrastructure for electricity. That must also stop. So as a community, let us take action. People who are vandalizing these things, how do we deal with them as a community? How do we support the distributor of electricity, Umeme? How do we support the regulator to also make sure that whatever they are doing on our behalf, we are benefiting from them, not from the few people who are actually destroying the infrastructure. And then maybe from me, one of the last things would be we have the Electricity Regulatory Authority, and has all the legislation, the regulations, the acts of parliament, all these beautiful laws around electricity supply, but consumers do not know them. What would be important is for the regulators and the distributors of electricity to also sensitize people about the existing policy frameworks. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? This kind of information should be public information given to people. I know that in our constitution, one of the chapters says that we are supposed to translate the constitution into the local languages. That has not materialized since the 1995. It is similar to the policies and frameworks and regulations and all these legal frameworks. People do not understand them. Why can't we, maybe the regulatory authority, why can't we have some little translated information to enable communities to understand what we are talking about? So I think it would be very nice that we translate or give this information on electricity, how to install, the regulations around that, how to use electricity lines, how to take care of the electricity lines, how to take care of the dams, people who are living near the dams, all of this information. What happens when you do this? How do I complain? How do I submit a submission to ERA? How do I? Those details must be shared with the population just as easy as that. Once the community is empowered and informed, they will be able to be critically aware. They will be able to make a choice. They will be able to make informed decisions on which kind of package they have to take on. Unfortunately, many of the consumers are not aware of these things, and so they are complacent because they don't know. People are acting out of ignorance. So it would be nice that we emphasize the issue of consumer protection through awareness raising, empowerment, making smaller committees at the community level to guide this whole process. Otherwise, we shall kill consumers, we shall waste energy, we shall be, it's a whole thing. So I want to implore our regulators, our stakeholders, our actors in the energy sector, please take charge of these comments that we are giving, we are collecting from the consumers, but also adding the philosophy of technical abilities to be able to reach out to our people. With those so many remarks, I think that Henry, you could also add other regulatory issues as we are left with about 10 minutes or so that we can push forward. But otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, those are the concerns that quickly came out from our consumers. And I hope that the consumers can take the advice very seriously, but also the regulator and the distributors of electricity have to take this very, very carefully. I know that there's a transition soon coming in Uganda where Umeme will be handing over to another entity. It's already public information. So we are yet to see how that transitions. But on behalf of Consent and the consumer entities, we are ready to meet the new service provider and we give them this information so that they know where to start from as they push the agenda on ensuring that everybody has access to clean energy, to electricity. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Henry.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Bernard. It was quite intense and rich. And just to add to what you have shared, there are quite a number of positives, and those positives, there is need to build on them. One of the positives I would love to start with, like in the communication sector, there is a consumer parliament, and there used to be an electricity. In the communication sector, there is the communication consumer parliament, and in also electricity, there used to be the electricity consumer parliament, and I think even the public hearings that come up, but most of the times they are time specific on, let's say, tariffs, like where we were invited to the transition of Umeme and the Uganda Electricity Distribution Limited, and you find that even the tariff explaining approval or public hearings, those are positives that we, in all the issues that Bernard you've raised, these need to be scaled up. And I recall the first electricity consumer parliament was held in Mbale, and I was invited and gave a petition. The second one was in Fort Portal. We also participated. We gave in the petition, and most of the issues that are contained in the complaints that are in the report, they continuously keep coming on board. So the issues that I'm looking at as we're winding up this are issues where consumers being in and clients of the electricity sector, the issues that we have collected become very key to make sure that the sector doesn't only serve big electricity consumers. When we aggregate all the consumers, they become the biggest electricity consumers. So consumers need to be listened to, and once the complaints come in, they need to be expedited. So the engagement of the policymakers, engagement of the service providers, engagements of the local governments, those are something that are very, very important, as they will help in doing consumer protection and also better business, because without electricity, like Bernard said, in areas of food safety, the foods go bad, and then there is food loss and waste. In areas of health, consumers will not get services. In areas of finance, in areas of transport, in areas of nearly everything, finance, communication. So electricity ends up being a foundation of everything. But they are us leaving the social. While at times it is said where there is a negative, at times there is a positive. So at times the challenges that are in the electricity sector are leading to innovations of new technologies. You'll find that some of the hard to reach, underserved areas are now going in for solar electricity, or solar, they're going in for solar panels and so forth. Those are key issues. And the issue of the quality of the solar panels, the quality of the solar infrastructure, that becomes very key. If the quality is not good, then the technology that would be an alternative to electricity will come in and endanger the environment. Because if I buy a poor quality solar panel and battery and even wirings, that means I'll do repeated purchases, and then I have to dump or these onto the environment. So these issues bring in technology improvement, but they impact socially, then they impact environmentally, like Bernard raised the issues. They bring in, they impede economic activities. This is where such an information that we are having in this report plays a role in policy advocacy. And those are some of the issues that we need to use. What do we need? What needs to be improved in regards to policy areas where there is vandalization by consumers? What policy approaches are needed, or legal and regulatory frameworks? So some of this information coming in as voices of the consumers can play a greater role in issues to do with social aspects, to do with the technology updates, to look at the environment, look at issues to do with economic activities, policy, regulatory aspects. So these bring in the foresight, and we plan as a country to make sure we move forward. The other aspect, and which still Bernard raised, the ethical aspect in service provision. A number of complaints have come in with poor quality products, gadgets. So this affects the sector. This leads to banning of homes. We have got standards for wires. There are strict guidelines for consumers to get wiremen or wiring personnel for our homes. These are issues like Bernard raised, where we need to do consumer awareness, business awareness on existing standards, so that when people are procuring and installing, they get to know that where there are socket wires, you don't need to put lighting wires. Where they are cooker wires, you don't need to put small socket wires. Volumes, all the high, the capacities needed to be taught through awareness and communication. Constant communication is going to be very key to address a number of aspects. The communities of consumers who need capacity, but they might not be in areas, at times consumers continuously complain. They're telling us to go online. To go online, we don't have access to gadgets that will lead us online. Like the customer care number, you say it is constantly engaged and so forth. But continuous communication, let's say, of outrages, these would help consumers to safeguard their gadgets, their appliances, or even to plan. So you find that the consumer voices that we collect, they are in for consumer protection and better business. Better business not only for small, medium enterprise, but for micro, small, medium, large, and the distribution companies, plus the policy. These voices are providing a foundation. The consumers, as society, as community, give a social license to operate. So once at times, some of the vandalism might lead, if we are not benefiting from, why is it in our area? But that shouldn't be the issue. With constant engagement, capacity building, communication, releasing technologies that can benefit appropriate for communities, and policy advocacy or continuous advocacy, this brings in a sustainable or a resilient environment, which is positive for all players in the electricity or in the energy sector. So these voices we bring out play a major role in confidence and trust building, where people do not end up having a hopelessness kind of mindset, where they have a positive mindset that if I don't access electricity today, with progression, with issues to be looking at me as a consumer, with improvement in social welfare, I might get the electricity and improve the quality of life I'm living. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was a great pleasure and an opportunity to once again reach out on this series. And would like to end up by thanking the Humanist Media Africa with the management of the Humanist TV Africa for always hosting us. And we look forward to being with you next Friday as we'll be deliberating on another aspect that is on all in the consumer voices. And we hope some of our views can help you wherever you are, not only in Uganda, in East Africa, Southern Africa, Western Africa, Northern Africa, Africa as a continent, and then the global world. A lot that can be learned from Uganda as a case study with regards maximizing consumer voices to better the planet we live on. So thank you very much, and I wish you a superb weekend. Thank you.